Is she brave? Of course she's brave. All those years invested as this sports legend. To come out transgender is horribly difficult. It is the most difficult thing you can do. I've been overseas. I've flown helicopter missions, surveillance missions. I've been shot, stabbed. Being brave is being yourself. And being transgender is about the bravest thing you can do. Did she deserve the award?
65?
Yes.
Why are we mainstreaming delusion?
It's not delusion.
Why would you call it delusion?
Because Bruce Caitlyn Jenner, I'll call him Caitlyn Jenner.
No,
because
it's
that's
her. You're not being polite to the pronouns.
Because
disrespectful.
Okay, forget about the disrespect. Facts don't care about your feelings. It turns out that every chromosome, every cell in Caitlyn Jenner's body is male, with the exception of some of his sperm cells. It turns out that his brain structure is male. It turns out that he still has all of his male appendages. How he feels on the inside is irrelevant to the question of his biological sex.
I don't agree with that. I'm not on that train. I'm not on that train. She wants to be called she. I'm going to call her she. I just have a problem with the message and the messenger.
So well, let's I'm going to do two things. I want to reiterate what Zoe said, which is the bifurcation of the courage to come forward after a lifetime as a male and a certain kind of a male versus did she deserve this award? Listen, the awards, what are award ceremonies except an opportunity to catch some eyes?
Especially the ESPN.
So, yeah, it's like ESPN, well done, ABC. Yeah. They did exactly what their job was, to attract eyes. They did it. That's what award ceremonies are for. But in terms of the science behind gender dysphoria, you're very familiar with that, Zoe.
Very familiar.
It's not about the chromosome. Excuse me, the chromosomes within our nuclei. Yeah, go ahead.
Chromosomes don't necessarily mean you're male or female.
Gender.
With gender
identity. Go ahead. No, so
especially, but even so, you have a thing like Klinefelter's syndrome. So you don't know what you're talking about. You're not educated on genetics.
Would you like to discuss the genetics? Or
well,
no.
no,
What
no.
are your genetics?
So I'd stay away from the genetics and back to the brain scans.
You cut that out now, or you'll go home in an ambulance.
Yeah, that seems mildly inappropriate for a political discussion.
No, I know. Well, but wait. To be fair, you're actually being kind of rude. And that's not fair.
I'm sorry, it's not rude to say that someone who is biologically a male is a male. Someone who is biologically male is a male. Okay. So first of all, honest to God. Okay, guys, I'm sorry. I have to explain to you how semantics work. Like, really, I think this is important now. Okay. You're so boring. You're so boring. Okay, so let me explain to you something, okay? If you're gonna pick a chant like shame, who, me? If you're gonna pick a chant like shame, watch Game of Thrones first. The bad guys shout shame. You're not changing anybody's mind. All you're showing everybody is that your collective IQ, if it were channeled into electricity, might be able to toast a piece of bread lightly. Okay, so can we talk now, or are you going to keep shouting? Like, really, now's your chance to get it out. Let's hear your feeling. Come on. Just go for it. Or it's going to be like every 30 seconds, like the annoying microwave timer. Like, you got anything more? You got anything more? Okay, are we done? Thank you. All right. Social justice. Okay, if you guys are all going to come up here, can we at least have circle time or something? Are you guys having a tough time seeing? Safety! 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 When you talk about dismantling safe spaces, the very presence of that space on campus. The very presence of that space on this campus tells you what to.
Hi.
Howdy.
Fact number one. Transgender is not a disease. This is not my opinion. This is facts from the World Health Organization and the American Psychologists Association. Just like gay people don't have a disease. Fact number two. Rich kids stay rich, poor kids stay poor. Out of 1,800 billionaires in the world, 12 of them are black. Where you come from, where you grow up, how much your parents earn, Whether your parents were married plays a major role in determining
I know.
where
Is there a
life
question
will
mark at
end
the
up.
end?
Fact number 3, I would just like to remind you that hate speech is not free speech.
Yes, it is.
And my question is, since facts don't care about your feelings, why did you use false facts?
Okay, so none of the facts that I used are false. First of all, yes. No, okay, first of all, would you like the answer? Okay, so the 3 facts you mentioned, you talked about transgenderism. First of all, until 5 minutes ago, the DSM specifically defined transgenderism as a disorder. It defined it as gender identity disorder, now calls it gender dysmorphia, which doesn't even make sense. It says that depression is the actual problem, not the actual gender disorder, which again does not explain why the transgender suicide rate is upward of 40%, and the actual suicide rate for the rest of the American population is lower than 3%. Okay, so that's number 1. Number 2, you talked about income inequality, and you suggested that all wealth is inherited. This is nonsense. According to the IRS statistics, if you are born into the bottom 20% of wage earners in the United States, you will not be one of the bottom 20% of wage earners in the United States. 90% of people will not be within 15 years. There's tremendous wage mobility in the United States of America. Plus, there is not a group of people who just sit at the very top and stay there. People move up and down, in and out of the 1%. 1% just defines the line of income. It doesn't define the people who are in that 1% of income. I've been in the 1%. I've been out of the 1%. It will happen to lots of people. People who are older tend to be more likely to be in the 1%. They weren't once in the 1%. What happened? Okay, so that's number 2. Number 3, you say hate speech is not free speech. It depends how you define hate speech. The only speech that is not free speech is speech that overtly defends or pushes violence. Specifically, speech that is generating violence, right? That's the only type of speech that's not hate speech. If I say things you don't like, that's not hate speech. And if you think that it is hate speech, you're a fascist. End of story. People don't speak the language of efficiency. People don't speak Mitt Romney's 57-point tax plan. You can't even name 2 points on his 57-point tax plan. People speak the language of fairness and justice and morality. They want to think that they're right and the other guy is wrong. They want to have a feeling of, in many cases, unearned moral superiority based on their opposition to things. This is why everybody was getting off ripping on Donald Sterling for being a crazy old racist coot. Did they accomplish anything? No. But they felt real good because they got to go around telling all their friends that Donald Sterling was a racist old coot. Right? This is what they do. So, speak their language. In other words, next time they say something like, I believe in the minimum wage, then you should say, why exactly is it that you want to put a gun to the head of a business owner and force them to pay something? Why is that okay? Why isn't that violative of basic principles of consent? Like you over here, you like gay marriage because you say that 2 men should be able to wed each other, but those 2 men shouldn't be able to do business with each other in a mutually agreed relationship? So if instead of them having sex, they were actually just, one was signing a check to the other to paint his car, then you're saying that's not okay? And that you're going to take a gun and put it to the head of one of them in order to make that happen? It's because you're a totalitarian. Right? This is the truth. At college campuses. We're not all going to end up in the same place. We choose different career paths. We make different decisions about our lives. We work non-equally hard. And so what the left has decided is that if they can't achieve economic equality, they tried that for a century and it resulted in 100 million people dead. So they said, okay, we'll put that to the side for the moment. We'll come back later with like stupid Bernie Sanders like Justin Trudeau. And Bernie Sanders himself and we'll talk income inequality, and then we'll talk about social democracy, and then eventually we'll sort of start inching our way back toward the confiscation of wealth at point of gun. But while we do that, in the short term, at least we should have equality of feelings, and that we can do immediately. We can ensure equality of feelings right now. If we can't all feel equal in our achievements, then we can at least all feel equal when it comes to our feeling of victimhood at the hands of Western civilization. What I said about income inequality is a few things. Number one, the idea that the people who are very, very rich somehow stole from the people who are very, very poor, and that's why they're very, very rich is stupid. Poor people are poor and don't have lots of money to steal. Okay, so the idea that Bill Gates got rich by ripping off a bunch of homeless people. Homeless people were not buying Microsoft, nor was he going to them, forcing Microsoft on them for them to stick into their boxes. Right? Like that's not how he got rich. The way you get rich in any free functioning economy is by participating in an enormous number of voluntary transactions that benefit both sides. You should care about the question of poverty. You shouldn't care about the question of income inequality. You should care about how do we make poor people rich, not how do we make rich people poorer so that everybody's at the same level. because that's just you being jealous. That's just you not liking the guy's house next door because it's bigger than your house. And look at that, he has a big house, I have a smaller house. Maybe I'll just go rob his place. Right? That's not moral, and it's not decent, and it's also not true. The fact is that while the left decries income inequality, the evils of capitalism, since 1994, the world extreme poverty rate has been sliced in half by increased capitalism and by free markets. Right? I mean, the free markets that are now being bashed left and right, those free markets are the greatest innovation in the history of humanity when it comes to the economy. It's why you have nice stuff. It's why you're not sitting in your backyard right now crafting your own handmade tie from a sheep that you had to shear yourself. I mean, I thought there's a great thing. I mean, just there's a little bit of a caveat on trade. I thought my favorite story of the last few months. There was some guy who decided that he wanted to make himself a BLT and see how much it cost to make the whole thing himself, right? Like from scratch. So he actually went and he bought a cow, and then he like killed the cow, and he went out and he got a pig, and he went out and he milked and he made the cheese. He went out and he grew some wheat, and then he milled it, right? This whole thing, it cost him $1,600 to make a BLT, and it took him 6 months, right? You can go down to your local restaurant and get a BLT for $5 because of global trade and because freedom of income. And the fact is that when people talk about income inequality, what they're really saying is they don't understand how money works. They think that if there's two people in a room, one person with $5, one person with $1, the person with 5 stole from the person with 1. It doesn't ask the question, how did the person get poor? The reality is, if you don't want to be permanently poor in America, it's very, very easy. The Brookings Institute, which is a left-leaning institute, they say you only have to do 3 things. Graduate high school, don't have babies out of wedlock, get a job. That's it. Those are the 3 things. 75% of the people who do those 3 things will end up in the middle class. Not just not poor, in the middle class. Only 2% of people who do those 3 things end up permanently poor in the United States. So the idea that it's the rich people keeping the poor people down and they're doing it for their own pleasure, their own sick pleasure. Bill Gates says for sport he shoots poor people from the balcony of his mansion. It's asinine in every conceivable way. And it's so funny. I did a debate on National Geographic that never aired. It never aired because it was brutal. And it was me against 3, which made it almost fair for them. And it was like Van Jones, and I think Van Jones was on the other side, and some professor from NYU, and it was exactly on this topic. And I said to them, are you proposing that we actually just kill the rich people and redistribute their money? And they said no. And I said to them, why are you talking about the rich people? What did they do? And they didn't have an answer because they don't know what the rich people did. They just know they want their cash. The idea that income inequality is correlated in any way with overall poverty is really silly. There are countries with really high income inequality and very low overall poverty. That's like the United States. There are countries with 0 income inequality, Sudan, and nobody has anything. Right? So the idea that the differential is the statistic that matters, it doesn't. The fact is, in the United States, 9 out of 10 Americans are living above the global middle income standard. Right? Everybody in the United States is rich by global standards. And you want to get rid of the income inequality by destroying that. Good luck to you. Barack Obama has been terrible from beginning to end. He's divided us along racial and sexual lines. He's divided us along every line he could find. He came in with a great promise. Because the expectations for Obama were so high and he fell so short, he's really divided America. I think he's trolled the Republican Party into irrelevance, and I think that he's taken his own party to Bernie Sanders' land. And I think that, he's done that through policy, but he's mostly done that through his style. When Obama was elected, there was this great hope that he was finally going to help conciliate the greatest conflict that has ever torn the nation, the racial conflict, right? And instead he came in on the basis and governed on the basis that if you oppose him, it must be because you are black. And if there are imbalances in terms of equality, that is inequity, right? Inequality equals inequity. So if more black people than white people are going to prison proportionately, that must be because people are racist. It can't just be because too many black people are committing crimes, right? So by doing that, he's divided people along these lines. And you can see it in the Gallup polls. I mean, people now feel that the racial conflict in the country is at heights it hasn't been for decades. That to me is the most damaging thing, is that he's reverted American politics to a form of tribalism that I find very scary. In terms of his actual policy, Obamacare is destroying the medical system. It's raising premiums for people who are in the system. It's going to end up with an actual form of care that really is just redistribution of care. Which is going to hurt the people who are youngest and the people who are oldest. There's a reason Ezekiel Emanuel, who designed his Obamacare program, says he wants to die at 75. They're going to end up redistributing health care, and they're going to end up restricting it. As far as the economy, his economic policies, if you look at American history, every time there's a big bust, there is then a similarly sized boom unless you have a massive government policy like FDR and Hoover, or unless you have a massive government policy like Barack Obama. So on domestic policy, he's been terrible. He's pushed government into realms it never was before and created conflicts that weren't there before. So, for example, on the gay marriage issue, my position on this has been that the government should get completely out of the business of marriage. I think the government sucks at everything, and they suck at that too. So. What Obama has done instead is he said, okay, let's enshrine same-sex marriage for the purpose of cramming down on religious institutions the idea that they must participate in something they believe is sinful. That's not live and let live. That's live like me or I won't let you live. Right? And that's dastardly stuff. When it comes to his foreign policy is the worst of all of his policies. He set the world, I mean, it's cliche at this point, but he set the world on fire. His Libya war is a disaster and handed guns to terrorists. He talks about handing guns to ISIS. He actually did that in Libya. He talks about, Syria is a disaster area. The attempt to make Iran into a regional power with the assumption that they're going to moderate themselves is utter asininity. It's just foolishness on an unbelievable scale. His handing over of power to Russia in Crimea is going to end with NATO possibly breaking apart, because Russia is just going to continue encroaching on outlying portions of the NATO alliance and basically say, fine, come and get me, coppers. And he's allowed the Chinese to expand their realm of influence into the South China Sea, and you're going to see increasing Chinese intransigence and aggressiveness, because China demographically this happens with every country where you have a lot more males than females. China demographically, there are 125 males for every 100 females. When you have a lot of excess young men, there's only one thing you can do with those people, and that's put them in the army. And that's basically what China has done. So they're going to get very aggressive on the world stage very quickly. So every aspect, Latin America, of course, has become a disaster too. Every aspect of this presidency has been terrible, but when you have the media on your side, and when you're a likable fellow, and he is likable on camera, then those are assets that matter. And this is why when people say, how could we end up with a reality TV show host like Trump running? He's the second one to do it. Right? Obama's the first. You don't do interviews with the lady who sat in a bathtub full of Cheerios and Fruit Loops, and then tell me about how terrible it is that Donald Trump used to be on The Apprentice.
So my question was about abortion, and I just wanted to know, why exactly do you think a first trimester fetus has moral value?
Okay, so a first trimester fetus has moral value because whether you consider it a potential human life or a full-on human life, it has more value than just a cluster of cells. If left to its natural processes, it will grow into a baby. So the real question is, where do you draw the line? So you're going to draw the line at the heartbeat, because it's very hard to draw the line at the heartbeat. There are people who are adults who are alive because of a pacemaker. They need some sort of outside force generating their heartbeat. Okay, are you going to do it based on brain function? Okay, well, what about people who are in a coma? Should we just kill them? Right? The problem is, anytime you draw any line other than the inception of the child, you end up drawing a false line that can also be applied to people who are adults. So either human life has intrinsic value or it doesn't. I think we both agree that adult human life has intrinsic value. Can we start from that premise?
I believe that sentience is what gives something moral value, not necessarily being a human alone.
Okay, because, when you're asleep, can I stab you?
I'm still considered sentient when I'm asleep.
Okay, if you are in a coma from which you may awake, can I stab you?
Well then, no. I guess not. I mean,
I'm glad you answered that, because I have no interest in actually murdering you.
But that's still potential sentience, and it's still a potential.
I agree. It is potential sentience. You know what else is potential sentience? Being a fetus.
The issue with that. The issue I have with that, though, is that if I'm in a coma and I'm not doing anything to anyone, I'm not causing any issues amongst the world. Whereas an unwanted child may or may not.
Are not great with money by definition. Okay, if you are, name me one person in America who's phenomenal with money but is poor for 80 years in the United States. Anybody? Names? Anyone? Okay, military veterans. Okay, military. Okay.
Test. I'm sorry, Mr. Shapiro. I'm at a point right now, quite frankly, where I'm going to dismiss the students. I know there are other questions that would like to be asked.
Why?
With all due respect, Mr. Shapiro, Mr. Shapiro represents a narrative that he's providing to all of you guys based off of his opinions, what he believes, and what he wants to share with all of you. I know that the education was there for all of you to understand left side, right side, whatnot, but also the opportunity was allowed for him to impress upon you some of his opinions about certain things. And I think the lesson was there for me to understand and also for all of you to understand. I think what this is getting into now is it's starting to cross the line. And
what would that line be?
Why are they crossing the line? I don't see nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong.
Let me ask this
You're
question.
the one who's crossing the line.
Let me ask this question. If, for those students who would like to be dismissed, I'm allowing you to go ahead and do so at this time. For those of you who would like to continue to listen, you can remain and listen to Mr. Shapiro and also the information.
So, okay, let's assume that your scientific knowledge is vast. Let's assume your scientific knowledge. So, are you also against partial birth abortion?
I think it's like I don't understand why people would have a like.
At what point does that bundle of cells become a human being in your view?
Sorry.
No, really. I mean, this is.
I just need to calm down for a second.
Sorry, Jennifer.
You want to go to another round?
Abortion is a very simple issue. If you believe, as you do apparently, that that's nothing in there but just a bunch of goo, then you're right. If you believe in something called science, that is more than a bundle of goo, then you do not get to kill it just because it's convenient to you. And let me tell you something.
No, science definitely dictates that a fetus, until it can leave the womb and be technically viable, is a bundle of cells inside a person.
Okay, so if you can only live on life support, you're not a person. You stop being a person. So if you get in a car crash today and put you on life support, you're on an iron lung. You take off the iron lung, you're going to die. You're not a person anymore. Is that how this works?
If my brain is no longer functioning?
No, if your brain is functioning, but you can't breathe on your own.
Then I'm still technically viable. Brain function.
No, you're not, because the machine is keeping you alive. Look, again, the bottom line is this. If you are defining whether something is life or not based on your own convenience, that is the nature of evil. Okay, defining what a human being or not, whether something is a human being or not, based on whether you want it or not, is nasty.
You manipulate science to enhance your own.
You're the one manipulating science. You're the one suggesting that it's like snot.
You
it's not like snot.
Mental illness, when in fact the DSM-5, which is the definitive psychological examples of mental illness, has declassified
The DSM is highly politicized and has been for decades. And it was until 2 years ago, it was classified as gender identity disorder of mental illness. Okay, we can move on to questions.
Yeah, because you just don't like what we're saying.
No, see, the difference is I let you talk.
No, let's go. You actually know my father, but you had these conversations with him, and you shut him down too.
In what way have I shut you down? You've been talking for like 10 minutes here.
He's been talking, I've been talking, but you haven't actually answered our questions.
No, I did. You just don't like the answer. And I'm sorry if you don't like the answer. What's up?
How do you say that some people don't have privilege when you basically just said that trans people aren't valid? They're not a thing. They're just girls pretending to be boys or boys pretending to be girls.
Okay. Oh, someone's excited. Okay.
Biological, but gender is a completely different thing.
No, gender is not disconnected from sex. So.
It's not completely disconnected, but it's still a cultural thing. It's still from society.
Okay. No, it is not in the mind. Okay, you're not a man if you think you're a man. And I didn't say pretending, or if I did, I shouldn't have said pretending. Let me amend.
You said playing.
Okay, I said a boy who thinks he's a girl. That's the usual phraseology I use. Not playing. I usually say a boy who thinks he's a girl or a girl who thinks he's a boy, which is technically what we're talking about here. As far as the actual psychological issues at play, it used to be called gender dysphoria or gender identity disorder. Now they call it gender dysphoria. The idea that sex or gender are malleable is not true. Okay, and I'm not denying your humanity if you're a transgender person. I am saying that you are not the sex to which you claim to be. You're still a human being, and you're a human being with an issue that I wish you Godspeed in dealing with in whatever way you see fit. But if you are going to dictate to me that I'm supposed to pretend that men are women and women are men, no. My answer is no. I'm not going to modify basic biology because it threatens your subjective sense of what you are.
Okay, but you're still saying these kids should not be accepted because they don't really fit in either place? They can't just
I'm saying that the Boy Scouts have a standard. You must be a biological boy to be a Boy Scout. You have to be a boy to be a Boy Scout.
Where's that written, though? Okay.
In the name Boy Scouts. Because this is a very For all of human history, boy meant boy and girl meant girl. Boy did not mean girl.
People are very more dangerous culture.
And if I call you a moose, are you suddenly a moose? Okay, if I redefine our terms. No, yes, that's right. Men and women are a completely different thing. This is true. Have you ever met a man or a woman? They're completely different.
It's a completely different thing. You can't just say you're a cat. It's not a thing. It's genders. It's not saying you're.
Okay, why is that? I don't understand. Why? Okay, let me ask you this. Okay, I won't ask you how old. I will ask you how old you are. Okay, because you're young enough that it's probably not insulting to ask you. So.
I'm 22, so I'm probably gonna be naive, right?
No. Why aren't you 60? Why aren't you 60?
Because
And why can't you identify as 60? What is the problem with you identifying as 60?
it's not the same as gender. You can't just.
You're right. Age is significantly less important than gender. You can't magically change your gender. You can't magically change your sex. You can't magically change your age.
You can still legally change it. People recognize.
You can't legally change your age, by the way.
Obviously, you can change your name, you can change your sex, you can change your identity.
Just because you can do things legally doesn't mean that they are correct biologically. You could do lots of things in the past that were incorrect biologically and correct legally. For a long period of time in the United States, sterilization of the mentally ill took place. That didn't make it okay. Skinner versus Oklahoma. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote the decision.
Right. I still don't understand why you're accepting these children that are.
It's not a matter of open-minded and accepting. I want them to get treatment that they see fit, but that's not involving me. The idea behind the transgender movement as a civil rights movement is the idea that all of their problems would just go away if I would pretend that they were the sex to which they claim.
Have you talked to a group of trans people at all instead of this group of, like, white people?
I'm more than happy to talk to a group of any people who will have me, but usually they protest me.
Hi, Ben. My name is also Ben. That's about it, though. That's all we have in common. You spoke a lot about how the crime and a lot of the issues in America come with having sex out of wedlock and having basically broken up families. I was wondering your opinion on mass incarceration in this country and how that affects and ties into victimization, specifically related to black and brown people, but I'll get there in a second. America has 25% of the world's prison population with 5% of the world's population. So obviously a lot of your families where kids go wrong, they don't have the support systems, that's why. Their fathers or their mothers are in prison. And you can look at very concrete examples of ways where the law has not been applied equally to black versus white people. So one example of that is in 1986, the Anti-Drug Abuse Act, where they punished crack cocaine, which black people used more than white people, at a 100-to-1 rate, which was recently reduced to 18-to-1 under Barack Obama. So I don't see how you can claim that everyone is treating equally and no one is victimized on a systemic level when you have laws that punish one race that is more likely to use one type of drug more than another race, when it's actually been shown that among kids our age, white people and suburban kids are more likely to use drugs in schools than black inner city kids.
Okay, so there's a lot there, and you're right, we disagree on everything. So, so to begin with, I don't believe in the concept of mass incarceration because that implies that the police are going into black communities with a lasso, rounding people up and taking them to jail for no reason. I don't think that's happening. Every person who is in jail has had a trial or a plea. The idea that people are just being grabbed and thrown into prison to keep alive some sort of prison industrial complex where the prison masters are the ones running the system, I don't see evidence of that. As far as the 1986 law, I think that it's important to put this into context. And the context is that that law was originally pressed by black legislators from inner cities who were sick of watching crack cocaine destroying their communities. And the reason for the disparity is because crack was more easily distributable and significantly more effective than powder cocaine. It is also the fact that the vast majority of people who are distributing and using crack cocaine were black. You know, it's a drug that the vast majority of people who distribute and use are white? Crystal meth. Guess what the penalty is for 1 ounce of crystal meth versus 1 ounce of crack cocaine? They are identical. They are identical because they are easily distributed and they are distributed in similar forms. So the idea that this was just some sort of attempt to grab black people off the street and throw them in jail for no reason so we could have a permanent underclass of people with no fathers, this seems to me like a giant conspiracy theory with little evidence to support it. As far as the idea that these communities would be better if we just release people onto the streets, so I think it's important, again, to note the statistics here. The fact is the vast majority of people who are in jail for drug crimes are in for distribution, not merely for use. The idea that it's a black kid who's just smoking crack on the street who's getting picked up by the cops and thrown in jail, the justice system doesn't have time for that. Okay, the vast majority of even possessions that are pled down from distributions. Now, I've said earlier, I'm not in favor of the drug war. Okay, but I can tell you something. The people who are currently acting in criminal fashion in the drug war aren't going to be out acting as model citizens as a general rule. A lot of those people are going to be committing other crimes because this has been the history of the United States. When you make a substance illegal, the people who are criminals were criminals before and they're criminals after. Al Capone was not going to turn into a banker after Prohibition ended. And the same thing is true for a lot of the people who are committing criminal acts by distributing illicit substances. So I think that to pretend that the epidemic of single motherhood is going to end, all these guys are just going to decide, you know what, I've decided to marry that girl, I'm going to stay home, and it's going to be like Leave It to Beaver. When they were dealing crack on the corner to 12-year-old kids the day before, I think that's a little bit of a myth.
Yeah, I want to respond to one specific point. You were saying the idea that cops are going into black communities and lassoing up black people is completely ridiculous. How would you explain the amount of black people in jail currently?
Higher numbers of black people committing crimes.
Well, that's not the case.
It is absolutely the case.
Keep going. It's been statistically shown that white people use drugs just as much as
And
black
as I said,
people.
people are generally not arrested for using drugs. They're generally arrested for drug distribution in the drug war.
Do white people not distribute drugs?
Well, they don't in terms of proportionality with regard to, I mean, the idea that, again, you need to show me the statistics on drug distribution. So the burden is on you to prove the disparity, not on me to prove the non-disparity.
I don't see how either of us can have, we should have an equal distribution of trying to prove the disparity.
Well, you're the one who's accusing the criminal justice system of wild injustice. Again, I don't have the statistics in front of me, so it's hard for me to cite statistics on that particular aspect of drug distribution, but you'd have to show that there are a bunch of white people who are distributing drugs to the same extent as the black people in jail, and then tell me that they're not being treated equally. You can't just suggest that drug use is equal to drug distribution, because statistically it's not.
Okay. Thank you.
Yo.